The fork wavered in my hand, a thin tremor betraying the tension coiled around the table, and I let it settle carefully onto the polished wood. His voice cut through the low hum of conversation with the precision of a scalpel. "You'll hand the house over, won't you?" The words landed in the air like stones, expected to provoke an immediate nod, a rehearsed compliance. Around me, the laughter flickered, light, sharp, but strained, like the echo of a performance everyone had practiced except for me. I felt the crystals of the chandelier above tremble faintly, catching the wine glass at my elbow, the reflection quivering in the liquid. I set it down deliberately, slow, deliberate enough for every eye to follow the motion, to witness my refusal. "No," I said, and the single word felt heavy, dragging the air with it. Time stilled. Someone murmured my name, low and cautious, like a warning whispered into the shadows of the room. My mother's pearls clicked against her silk blouse as she turned, a soft, deliberate sound of disapproval. My father's jaw twitched once, rigid, holding back a storm I had long anticipated. Silence stretched between us, interrupted only by the wine dripping onto the floor from the overturned glass, its tiny splashes punctuating the quiet like a metronome of judgment. "So we'll sue," he said. Familiar, almost ritualistic. The words settled over me like dust, stirring up memories I thought I had buried. When I was 9, glass breaking was my signal, a sound that no one else noticed or cared to acknowledge. Tyler would slam doors or shove a picture frame from its hook, and I would gather the pieces before anyone else came home, sweeping up the evidence of chaos as if it were my duty to maintain a facade of calm. He called me the cleanup crew and laughed until I forced a smile, afraid he might stop otherwise. That had been our rhythm, his noise, my silence. At 13, the pattern persisted, punctuated by his recklessness. He crashed my bicycle into a mailbox one afternoon. I watched as my father replaced Tyler's bike immediately, the new paint gleaming in the sun, while my own remained bent, rusted, abandoned at the curb for years. I told myself it didn't matter, that lie was easy then. In truth, it had always mattered. Those small injustices accumulated quietly, stacking themselves against me with the weight of inevitability. By 17, I had learned to intervene, to fix what could be fixed before it could break, to assert control in the only way that felt tangible. The kitchen sink that dripped endlessly, the cabinet hanging by a single hinge, these were the small battlegrounds where I could demonstrate competence, reclaim order. My mother would pass, coffee in hand, half smile as she said, "You should have been born a boy. At least you'd be useful." Tyler would grin over his cereal, tapping the spoon against the bowl, an applause of mockery that echoed in my head at night. Each sound, each glance, each tiny assertion of dominance left traces in my memory, silent echoes I carried like marks etched into my skin. And yet, amidst the cacophony of comparison and neglect, there were brief, fragile moments of recognition. Grandma would sit with me in her garden, tracing the soil where roots had split the concrete to reach the sunlight. "You're like that," she'd say. "You don't fight loud, but you grow through concrete." At the time, I didn't understand the meaning behind her words, I only felt the weight of their certainty. It wasn't until years later, when I inherited her journals, that I realized she had been teaching me resilience in the quietest, most deliberate ways. Those journals became my blueprint, a guide for reconstructing not just furniture or walls, but the broken architecture of my own endurance. And so the table, the wine, the poised threat, it all settled on me, but it did not break me. My hands, trained from years of silent labor, knew the difference between yielding and standing firm. The fork lay still on the table, the chandelier above hummed softly, and I understood with clarity what had always been true: no laughter, no plea, no name whispered in warning could undo the patterns I had spent my life learning to master. The past and present overlapped here, in this charged room, and the child I had been, the one who cleaned up glass and endured quiet injustice, was watching, finally ready to confront the noise with an unwavering stillness of her own. The memory of that night at the table lingered as I moved through the house, my hands tracing the edge of the kitchen counter where a small chip had formed years ago. I had learned early that control was only mine when I took it for myself. By 17, that lesson became routine. I started fixing things in the house, one small project at a time. The kitchen sink that had leaked for months, the cabinet door hanging by a single hinge, the uneven shelves that seemed ready to collapse at the slightest touch, these became the measures of my autonomy. Each repair was deliberate, each movement a claim over a space that no one else seemed to respect. My mother's voice would float through the hall, carrying the casual cruelty that had shaped me. "You should have been born a boy. At least you'd be useful." She didn't pause for reflection, didn't soften her words, and Tyler would sit across the table, spoon in hand, tapping lightly against his cereal bowl as if applauding. The sound echoed in my head long after the morning light had faded, lingering like a reminder that nothing I did could ever seem enough. College brought its own skewed scales. Tyler failed 2 semesters, barely raising an eyebrow, and still walked away with a new car, gleaming and untouched, a reward I had never received for my diligence. I finished my studies early, collecting tools instead of accolades, manuals instead of praise. My father looked at the set of wrenches and hammers with the faintest hint of approval. "These suit you better than a desk job," he said, and it was meant as consolation, but I recognized it as acknowledgement in disguise. The tools were mine. The work was mine. And yet, fairness remained an absent concept, a silent observer that never intervened. I stopped expecting it. I stopped asking for it. There were days when the quiet ache of being overlooked pressed heavily against my chest, and I had to remind myself that survival didn't require their recognition. Each repaired hinge, each leveled shelf, each tiny patch of grout was a claim on reality, a testament that I could make order out of disorder even when no one noticed. My life became measured in nuts and bolts, sandpaper and paintbrushes, the tactile evidence of effort that could not be erased by negligence or favoritism. Grandma was the exception to that pattern. She noticed, always. In her garden, kneeling among the roots that broke through cracked concrete just to reach sunlight, she would rest a hand on my shoulder. "You're like that," she'd say. "You don't fight loud, but you grow through concrete." I didn't understand the full meaning at the time. Her voice carried certainty, soft but unyielding, and I trusted it more than any praise or criticism from the others. She became the quiet measure against which I could gauge my own strength. Her words were less instruction than compass, persistent, silent, undeniable. Even as Tyler mocked my efforts or my parents dismissed them, I began to internalize a rhythm that belonged solely to me, their noise, my response. I learned that endurance was not weakness, it was preparation. The repairs I performed, small as they were proof that I could build, sustain, and claim something entirely outside of their control. By the time I graduated, I had accumulated more than tools. I had collected competence, independence, and the knowledge that my labor, unlike their opinions, could not be taken lightly. Yet the injustice was never absent. The stark contrast between Tyler's unearned rewards and my quiet diligence remained a backdrop to every achievement. The new car he received after failing, the casual disregard of my efforts, the consistent underestimation of what I could do, all of it reinforced the lesson I had learned early. Fairness was a concept that existed only in stories. In reality, the work was tangible, recognition was optional. Each time I tightened a screw, sanded a board, or repaired a leak, I measured my value not in approval, but in the result of my own hands. That rhythm of disparity persisted into adulthood. My hands learned to anticipate the subtle flaws in every wall and fixture, my mind cataloging every small injustice, every echo of that applause from the cereal bowl, every glance that suggested I was less than because I was quiet. I became fluent in self-reliance. I became meticulous, deliberate, unwavering. The pattern I had learned as a child, his chaos, my labor, the silent negotiation between noise and control, had evolved into strategy, into understanding that the measure of my effort would always be mine to preserve. Grandma's metaphor became literal in my practice. Just as roots sought light through concrete, I learned to persist through the neglect, the favoritism, the diminishment. Every repaired hinge, every cabinet door fixed, every small corner of the house I reclaimed through my work, reinforced the truth: strength does not always announce itself with sound. Sometimes it grows quietly, methodically, unseen until it cannot be ignored. And in that silence, I discovered a certainty no laughter, no dismissal, no injustice could diminish. After my grandmother passed, the house felt quieter, and the weight of her absence pressed against the walls. Her journals were left to me, while Tyler inherited the trust fund, $5,000 set aside for him that seemed almost casual in its delivery. Holding her journals in my hands, I could feel her presence in the neat lines of writing, the sketches of furniture, the diagrams for repairs she had made for her own home. Every page was precise, every note a step-by-step guide to seeing what others discarded and making it whole again. I started small. Broken chairs, a table with a splintered leg, a cabinet that had sagged under years of neglect. Each repair was slow, deliberate. I measured twice, cut once, sanded the rough edges until the surfaces were smooth. The work became a language I understood fully, one that spoke without judgment and answered only in results. It was exhausting, but for the first time, exhaustion felt like proof. Proof that my efforts could stand against indifference. Then I found the house. A 1920s craftsman in Portland, leaning on itself as if waiting for someone to care. The listing was cheap because no one wanted to take responsibility for the decay. I walked through it once, and every step revealed another flaw: plaster cracked, floors bowed, windows rattling in the frames. But it felt alive, waiting for work, for attention, for someone who would see what it could be. I made the decision on the spot. I bought it, knowing every cent from savings, every weekend I could spare, every ounce of calm would go into this house. The first night I stepped inside alone, I traced my hand along the warped doorframes, feeling the weight of the walls, the echoes of years without care. I patched cracks in the plaster, sanded the steps that had been worn smooth, replaced broken windows. Everything was deliberate. Each action measured. I did not rush, and I did not show off. I did it for the house, for the proof that labor could reclaim what neglect had taken. When my parents came to visit, I was in the kitchen, hands raw from hours of sanding. My father laughed, low and dismissive. "You're going to burn yourself out fixing that dump." His tone was not angry, just certain that my effort was foolish. My mother nodded in agreement. "At least Tyler is working on something real." They passed through the rooms, holding mugs of coffee I had made by hand. Neither finished drinking. I watched them leave, the car raising dust behind it, and I felt the familiar weight of being overlooked, the echo of expectations I had never met. The house groaned with settling boards and old wood, but it stood. That was enough. Every day became routine. I repaired the house systematically, noting which walls needed reinforcement, which floors required sanding, which windows needed sealing. I cataloged every part of the process mentally, memorizing which tools worked best for each repair. There were nights when the effort seemed endless, when the paint didn't dry evenly or a step refused to sit level. My hands bore the marks of labor, blisters, calluses, the fine dust that coated my skin. And every time I pressed my hand against a finished wall or rail, I felt the solidity beneath my fingers, the confirmation that the work was mine and mine alone. Through it all, I thought about the contrast with Tyler. He received the trust fund, the car, the unearned rewards. I had the journals, the knowledge, and the labor. Each of us got something, but the value of mine was invisible to anyone else. That did not matter. It only mattered that I could see it, touch it, live within it. The house became a ledger of my effort, each repaired crack a record of persistence. I did not expect approval, and I did not wait for praise. The walls themselves were witness. When I looked out the window at night, listening to the wind against the eaves, I could hear the echoes of my childhood, the sound of Tyler's laughter, the crash of broken objects, my own small, quiet responses that went unnoticed. But here, in this house, nothing went unnoticed. Every repair, every nail, every smooth surface mattered. It was tangible, undeniable. My effort could not be ignored, erased, or misrepresented. And yet, despite the satisfaction in the work, I remained vigilant. I fixed each wall before visitors arrived, each floor before a guest might notice, every detail attended to so that no one could claim negligence or mistake. The house was mine to defend, not just from decay, but from the familiar judgment of those who never understood what I could accomplish. My father's laughter, my mother's approval of Tyler's activities, these were irrelevant here. The house did not care about their perception. It only responded to my hands, my choices, my persistence. By the time the work was halfway done, the house had become more than a project. It was a testament. Every morning I walked through it, inspecting each repair, confirming the strength of every corner, the alignment of each board. The smell of sawdust, the faint scent of varnish, the creak of the stairs beneath my weight, these were affirmations of effort, the proof that labor created ownership. I knew it would not impress anyone else, but that was irrelevant. The record was mine. The house remembered. The winter air pressed against the windows as I worked on the house. My hands were sore and covered in calluses from sanding and repairing the steps, the window frames, and the door frames. Each surface needed attention, and I moved carefully, checking the work I had done, making sure it was solid and complete. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the radiator and the occasional scrape of tools against wood. I had learned to focus on the work itself, letting the rhythm of repairs guide my actions. The phone rang. I picked it up after 2 rings. My father's voice was calm and controlled. "Tyler needs that house more than you do. If you don't sign it over by Friday, we'll see you in court." I did not answer. I let the phone sit next to my coffee cup, watching the reflection of my hand in the mug. I did not flinch. I did not react. The statement was nothing new. Threats, expectations, and demands were part of how they tried to control me, but the house was mine. My work was proof that they could not take it. A few moments later, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was my mother. Her voice was sharper, colder. "You know what you owe us. Don't make this ugly." She hung up before I could respond. The line went silent, and the wind rattled the windows. I understood clearly that this was the same attempt at control, just delivered in a new way. They expected obedience, but I had learned not to respond in fear or anger. I had learned to act based on what I had done, what I owned, and what I had proven through effort. I stood and picked up my tools. The chisel, the sandpaper, and the keyring on the hook near the door rested in my hands. They were not just tools or keys, they represented the work I had completed and the control I had maintained over this house. Each repair, every step I had sanded, every wall I had patched, was evidence that I had built this on my own. I would not hand it over, and I would not allow them to take what I had earned. I walked through the house, checking the repairs again. The stairs were solid, the walls smooth, the door frames aligned. Every detail I had restored was intact. The work itself reminded me that I was capable of maintaining what was mine, and that no threat, no demand, no family argument could change that. The phone could ring, letters could arrive, but my actions and my ownership were the facts. I held the keys in my hand, gripping them tightly. They stayed still. I did not need to open doors for anyone else. This was the point when I realized fully that I had stopped being their daughter in the way they wanted me to be. I was no longer responding to their control. I was prepared to defend what I had built. The work I had done over the years, the repairs, the labor, and the proof of effort, all of it was in my hands, and no one could take it without legal battle, evidence, and confrontation. I was ready. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by tools and materials. The house was quiet, the wind tapping lightly against the windows. I went through the repairs in my mind, confirming that everything was complete, and I catalogued what I had accomplished. Nothing could undo these repairs, nothing could erase my work. The calls were attempts to intimidate, but I did not respond. I focused on the facts, the tools, and the evidence of my effort. My hands rested on the keys, and I was certain of my position. I understood clearly that the house was no longer just a place to live. It was a record of what I had built with my own hands. I had completed the repairs, strengthened the structure, and maintained the evidence of labor. My parents could call, threaten, and demand, but I would not give them anything. I had the keys. I had the work. I had the proof. I would not be their daughter in the way they expected. I would act according to what I had accomplished. I would defend what was mine. The light from the windows fell on the repaired floors, the patched walls, and the restored door frames. I walked through each room once more, confirming the solidity of my work. The phone remained silent. I did not answer. I did not react. I focused on the repairs, the tools, and the keys. Every detail in the house was evidence of my labor, and I was ready to protect it. This was the moment I became their opponent. I would no longer open the door to their control. The work on the house continued, but the memory of their calls and threats of court stayed with me. The next day, I met with my lawyer Claire and her assistant James in her office. Their space was organized, desks aligned, stacks of documents neatly arranged. I placed the folder I had prepared in front of me: invoices, photographs of repairs and cracked walls, bank statements, and recordings of calls I had saved since the threats. Claire looked through them carefully, nodding. James immediately started organizing each piece, creating a clear timeline of events. We began from the earliest records. Every photograph, every receipt, every bank transaction was logged in both digital and physical formats. I recited the details of each payment, each purchase of materials, each repair I had done. Claire listened calmly, marking the critical points. I could see that the order we were creating was giving me a sense of control over the situation. Every piece of evidence built a precise account showing that Tyler had accessed Grandma's trust, and that my parents had tried to claim the house I had restored with my own hands. After hours of sorting and labeling, we moved on to preparing the counterclaim. Claire explained the legal points we would pursue: fraud, misappropriation of inheritance, and tax violations. I placed each document in the corresponding folder, making sure that everything was complete and verifiable. Every receipt, every photograph, every bank transfer became a part of the record that I controlled. The act of filing and organizing was not just preparation, it was establishing proof that nothing could be taken from me without consequence. Over the next few days, I worked at the house by daylight and at the table at night, surrounded by folders, receipts, and printouts. I digitized all records, naming files systematically: renovations, utilities, taxes, and communications. Each label made the evidence stronger. I replayed the calls from my father and mother, saving them under threat recordings, confirming the repeated attempts to intimidate me. James cross-checked every detail while Claire verified that our legal language matched the claims precisely. The process was methodical and slow, but I had finally found the rhythm. When the court filings were complete, Claire explained the sequence. Once they filed, we would respond immediately with the counterclaim. I reviewed every document, confirming that nothing was missing. Each folder represented hours of work, proof of ownership, and accountability. The house was no longer just walls and wood, it had become evidence, a demonstration of what I had accomplished independently. Every mark on the floors, every smoothed wall, every repaired fixture would now be part of the legal record. The first notice of discovery arrived, and I was at the same kitchen table where I had spent countless nights sanding and repairing. The blinds cut lines across the desk, highlighting the organized stacks of evidence. Claire guided me through each step, and I followed without hesitation. I labeled each page, stored each copy, and prepared for their response. My focus remained entirely on the documentation. The house was quiet around me, the only sounds the hum of the radiator and the occasional drip from the roof. During this time, calls from my family came through. Messages pressured me to settle, warning about reputation, about making things ugly. I archived each one immediately. There was no room for distraction. My attention was on compiling facts and creating an airtight case. Claire and James managed the legal filings, subpoenas, and notifications, while I continued to catalog, verify, and control every detail. By the end of the week, I was fluent in evidence, capable of presenting every repair, every transaction, and every interaction as proof that I had built and preserved my home independently. The day we filed the counterclaim, I sat at the table, pen in hand, signing the documents. Fraud, misappropriation, tax violations, every claim was precise and backed by documentation. Claire organized the folders efficiently, ensuring each copy was verifiable and submitted correctly. The filing marked the transition, the first step in holding my family accountable for their attempts to take what was mine. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from triumph, but from certainty. The house, the evidence, and my own diligence had become my defense. By the end of this phase, the house reflected not just my labor but also my preparation. Every step, every repaired board, every folder on the desk was part of a system designed to protect what was mine. The court process had begun, but I was no longer reacting. I was ready, organized, and entirely in control of the facts. The house and the documents together formed the proof I needed. The legal process was underway, and I was fully equipped to follow through, step by step. The day of the family dinner arrived, the meeting arranged to discuss what they called "What You Owe the Family." I arrived at the house with Claire and James. The folders of documents I had prepared for weeks were organized and laid out in order on the dining table. Each paper was labeled, every photograph and bank statement placed for immediate reference. I could see their expressions change the moment they noticed the setup. My parents' eyes shifted, their composure faltering. My brother slumped in his chair, confused, trying to mask it with impatience. Claire took the lead, moving through the folders methodically. She explained clearly, without emotion, the claims I had filed: misappropriation of funds from my grandmother's trust, fraudulent use of the trust money by my brother, and the attempts by my parents to take control of my property. Each point was backed by documentation, evidence, and records I had collected and organized over months. My father's jaw tightened as he read line after line of bank statements and transfers. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass but stopped midway, unable to steady herself. My brother's chair scraped against the floor as he pushed back, trying to interject. "You can drop this now," my father said finally, his voice low but tense. Claire shook her head and continued calmly, "The choice is simple. Return the funds with interest, file amended taxes to correct previous submissions, or we proceed with federal action." I watched them closely. No one spoke after that. Their initial attempts to argue, to cast doubt, fell silent in the face of the documentation. My brother opened his mouth a few times but closed it again, realizing there was no argument left to make. The table was quiet except for the soft rustle of paper and the click of folders being moved. I spoke then, carefully and without raising my voice. "I am not here to take revenge. This is accountability. Every action is documented, and every decision is clear. The responsibility is yours, not mine." My mother began to cry, her sobs loud and uneven. My father stared at the documents in disbelief, unable to process the details quickly. My brother looked down at the table, silent. Claire stacked the folders neatly, closing each one with precision. James snapped his briefcase shut beside her. I didn't look back at any of them. After the meeting, I walked out of the house, my hand on the doorknob, turning the key and locking it behind me. I didn't speak. The act was simple, practical, and final. The control they had attempted to assert for years was contained to the other side of the door. The house, the space I had restored and maintained, remained under my ownership, intact and undisturbed. In the following months, the court filings were completed. Each repayment from my brother was documented. The trust fund discrepancies were corrected, taxes filed accurately, and all legal notices went through the proper channels. The house became quiet again. No lawyers, no calls, no arguments. I spent mornings on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight fall across the floors I had repaired and maintained. Each corner of the house, every wall, every nail and scratch was a record of my effort. Claire visited once more, quietly handing me the final envelope with all signatures confirming ownership. I didn't open it immediately. I placed it on the counter, leaving it there as confirmation that the process was complete. The house remained organized, orderly, and calm. The envelopes in the mail carried my name alone. The space was mine. The knowledge that everything was finally settled was enough. Walking through the garden, I noted the soil was damp from recent rain. I moved through the rooms, checking that everything was in place, as I had arranged it. The house was not just a building, it was a confirmation of what I had done, what I had rebuilt, and what I had protected. The key in my hand no longer represented just access to a door, it represented the authority and control I had finally established for myself. I closed the front door and confirmed it locked. I turned the key once more, making sure the mechanism held. Everything that had been threatened, everything that had been challenged, was now secured. The house stood as proof of my work, my decisions, and my right to manage my own life. The family's attempts to undermine me had failed. The documentation, the effort, and the process had solidified my ownership. The space was mine to live in and manage without interference. I finally felt the certainty that no amount of argument or pressure could undo what I had accomplished.